I am not going to do the official welcome here. Mine is just to say that we are all here, and I will be making one or two announcements before we start. And one of those is an apology from two of our other speakers. My name is Wandile Kasile. I'm the public programs coordinator here. We have an apology from Mishka, who was meant to facilitate this conversation this morning. So she asked if I could convey the apology. Her mom had to be taken to hospital. It's something that's beyond her control. She said that she would come late. If she doesn't make it this morning, we just need to understand that. The second apology is from Ms. Crystal Donna Roberts, who actually also was told that she won't be able to come this morning. And I must also just apologize that the confusion that I had that some of us we went to the TH Bell when the venue is here. So let me rather convey that deepest apology this morning. What I'm going to do now, I would like to ask Dr. Bongani, who is the Executive Director, Co-Functions, to come and welcome us this morning. Let's give him a round of hands, please.
A very good morning to all of you. For a moment, I lost myself. I nearly got myself into the 1980s struggle mode. Then I remember that today I'm an official. So, a very warm welcome to Iziko, and thank you to the young people for warming us up and for reminding us that Azania is still not completely free, but we have our freedoms. So those are the discussions today. I hope as we engage, as we celebrate the achievement of women today, the struggles that women launched against apartheid, against the brutality of a system that strived to suppress all who strive for humanity and for human rights, and in particular a system that strived to suppress black people in general and women in particular. It is a struggle that reminds us that in as much as we are in a free South Africa, those issues that were raised in the 50s and those issues that were raised in the 60s, 70s by women in particular, some of those continue to dominate our spaces today. And I hope today, as we listen very carefully to our panelists today, we'll be able to tackle those issues. Because ours is a country that prides itself in active citizenry. And it is because of that active citizenry that we are able to engage and also we are able to find solutions. But we have to acknowledge that in order for us as a country to move forward, there are ills that we need to face. We also need to acknowledge that in order for us to be able to move forward, there are also achievements that we need to take into account. But we are seeing, as one of the exhibition titled in this museum is titled, A Lucha Continua. As the struggle continues, we hope we'll be able to make some inroads and strides. With those few words, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you all to the Iziko Slave Lodge. Iziko Slave Lodge. I welcome ladies and women in particular. Today, we as men who are here also need to sit down and take notes and to learn and to listen attentively. To our panelists, thank you for agreeing to be part of us. Thank you also for allowing to share your experiences with us. This is an intercultural dialogue. As young people, we hope also we are going to engage them. I welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ndlovu, for that warm welcome this morning. And I just want to add one more thing, that today also is International Day of World's Indigenous Peoples. And I think it's also celebrated globally as well. or this year, basically. I just want to have maybe one last apology, and I hope that the House will accept this apology. As we know that Mishka Lewis is not gonna be able to join us, and I was saying, and I got that message this morning, just now, and then I said to myself, oh well, I will have to basically be then, the facilitator of this conversation. So you are stuck with me today. So I hope that won't offend anyone. And I really would like to say that this gathering this morning, it really is a demonstration that museums can become sites of dialogical engagement. That museums can become what somebody once said, safe spaces for unsafe ideas. That we can come here as society and begin to talk about issues that affect us as a people. That museums can actually be decolonized indeed, so that society can begin to reconnect with the nationhood of our nation, our identity, our sense of reciprocity and cultural diplomacy. And this site in particular, a very important site in the unfolding history of our country, the Slave Lodge, which tells stories of people who once lived here or were once captured here. And it is those stories that are passed on from one generation to the next. And I think that museums actually play an important role in reconnecting us, not only to ourselves, but to the narratives of those who came before us. And the narratives of those who are coming after us. Because museums, if they don't play that role, if they don't play that central role in making sure that the nation actually does not forget about its own nationhood, then museums will become irrelevant. And this gathering today, it demonstrates to us that museums actually are dynamic spaces. They can assist us in connecting not only to the narratives, but also to ourselves, to have a sense of sharing of ideas, sharing of cultural experiences. They can become those sites that somebody once said, sites of cultural diplomacy. Cultural diplomacy is a sense where people who come from different cultural experiences, they come together and share their cultural experiences. So I'm very excited that we've actually come to this space this morning. And I must really now also specifically thank our speakers who have accepted our invitation to come and join us and spend this day with us. I specifically would like to thank Diana Ferrus for accepting our invitation. And Bernedette, thank you very much. Ntebaleng at the back, thank you very much. And what I would like to do now, I would like to ask if they could come and sit in front, if that's okay with everyone. Diana is saying no. Okay, what we can then do, just to be comfortable. So the program as it is right now, Diana will come and share with us on her experiences as a poet. And Diana, she's no stranger, to spaces such as this. She's done really sterling work in terms of her poetry, the work that she's done, and the spoken and written word that she has put on paper, which has basically moved nations. You remember the return of Sarah Bartman, her poem that touched the nerve. It moved people to think about notions of return. And I think that we are very honored this morning to have Diana in our midst. And I must say that she's a living legend. Your work has basically moved us. And I think that all of us as young people here, we are very honored to have you here. And I'm sure that we will have a very fruitful conversation conversation as we continue with, with this discussion this morning. So I will ask Diana if you could come and share with us. And then after Diana, then I will introduce Ntebaleng Morake, who will then come after Diana has reflected. And then after Diana, I will ask Bernedette, Muthien to also come. And those are the three speakers that we have today. And after we have had the reflection and discussion, there will be light refreshments. We want them to go home hungry. So there will be something to eat. So I hope that we'll all feel comfortable and enjoy ourselves. Please feel free to reflect and just feel free to reflect on on any of the issues that will be raised here, because this is the day that we all have to come together and reflect on our experiences, and also commemorating and acknowledging the contribution and sacrifice of those who came before us. And women who have played an important role today, who are playing an important role today, and those who are still coming. So I think that's all on my side. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I forgot your name now. Thank you for inviting us to be here and have this discussion. Thank you, Wandile, and all the other honored guests. Thank you for having me. I think today is a very important day, and I'm glad that the Iziko Museum saw it fit to host a talk on Indigenous women on International Indigenous Peoples Day, and also because today it is 17 years ago that Sarah Baartman was buried in the village where she came from, the Gamtoos Valley. I want to reflect on writing that poem and what Sarah meant for us, and then I'll mean for us, and then I'll recite the poem. Well, I was aware of Sarah Baartman's story, and that she was in a museum since, exhibited in a museum since 1860 till 1986. So it makes it very, very valid to talk about Sarah Baartman today. She, after a death in Paris, she was dissected. A plaster cast was made of her body, and the brain and the genitalia, private parts, were taken out and then exhibited in Paris, Musée de l'Homme. And the French, they were the Griqua people who wanted her to come home, because we believed that in order for the soul to rest, the body must be buried. But the French made a law in 1850 that all artifacts in French museums belonged to the French state. So she was seen as an artifact. Well, upon my, becoming conscious of my roots, of who I am, of mixed Khoisan and slave descent, I wanted to know where my people come from, what happened to them. And one story I came across was Sarah Baartman. I went to study in the Netherlands in 1998, and there we learned about Sarah again, sexuality in the colonies, and how black women were used to further colonial ideas. In fact, when Sarah Baartman died, when they dissected her body, the scientists of Napoleon, George Cuvier and Geoffrey Saint-Hilaire, took her brain and her genitalia and the whole body, and they developed a theory that her people were people on the lowest rung, or the lowest on the hierarchy of races. You would have the white race, and then you have that race, and at the bottom you would have the Khoi from South Africa. And being in Holland made me very homesick, and I one evening thought of Sarah, and I'm reflecting on how I wrote this poem. Having all this knowledge and then learning about her again in class at the University of Utrecht. I was at that time already very homesick, and I was thinking, if I am this homesick, if I miss my mother who died the previous year, how much more did she miss her love? And then it was as if I heard a voice shouting, I want to go home, I want to go home. And that is where I turned around and went to my desk and wrote for Sarah, because I thought that it was her voice, but it's actually myself too. I wrote the first line, I've come to take you home. And then I finished the poem that night. I read the poem when I came home in South Africa, and I found that there is power in this poem, because people were touched by the poem, some cried, and some requested the poem again and again. And the poem went onto the internet, and that's where a French senator saw the poem. And he was moved by the poem. He was already busy trying to make an argument to have the remains of Sarah Baartman sent over to South Africa. And when he came across the poem, he thought the poem would be ideal to show how we feel about her remains still being in Paris, in a museum. And then he wrote to me. I remember that email because that first line of the senator was, Senator Nicolas Abu was, it made me laugh, because he said, "Dear Miss Ferrus, we were emotionally removed by your poem." And I thought, Senator, you actually meant moved. You didn't mean removed. And he said to me, he asked my permission to have the poem translated into French, because he wanted to use the poem as part of his argument to have the remains returned. And I said, yes, of course, Senator. Then he sent me the translated version. Beautiful. Couldn't understand French, but I thought it was beautiful. And then they promised me that they would, he's going to submit this as part of his argument, part of his bill, to have the remains returned to South Africa. And he read it in the French Senate, and it must have touched the hearts of the senators, because they voted unanimously that the remains must come home. And the Senate gave the French Parliament 3 months to send her home. In April 2002, I went with the official delegation to receive the remains. And I had to recite the poem. When it was my turn to recite the poem, one of our delegation said to me, "You must hurry, because the French minister must still go somewhere." And I thought to myself, I'm not hurrying. He will wait. We waited for 200 years, so he will wait. So when I came onto the stage like I am now, the woman who translated the poem was sitting there, Anne-Sophie Parisot. I asked her to read 2 stanzas in French. And then I took out my harmonica and I blew a song I wrote for Sarki. And then I put the harmonica away and I sang the song I wrote for Sarki. And then only I recited the poem. Vir my kom sê, ek moet hurry. And there's something in my life that I'm very proud of. I made a French minister wait. I think it's worthwhile to put in my CV. Anyway, I recited the poem, and 2 days after that we came home with the remains in the plane. I must tell you that the poem is published in the French law, which obviously gave me much acclaim, because it's the first time a poem was published in a French law. And then we came home with Sarah Baartman in the plane, and the pilot didn't pronounce to the people that her remains were in the plane. The history was in there. And the next morning, as we entered Johannesburg's airspace, the pilot announced, "We welcome Sarah Baartman back into a country of birth after 192 years. So yes, this is the story of indigenous people, of a black woman, a poor woman, and a woman who suffered, on whose body theories were written. And it was theories that followed us. And that's why we remember Sarah Baartman today. There were others who were taken away as well, but we don't have their names. But when we remember Sarah Baartman, we remember them too. I've come to take you home, a tribute to Sarah Baartman. I've come to take you home. Home. Do you remember the veld? The lush green grass beneath the big oak trees. The air is cool there. And the sun does not burn. I have made your bed at the foot of the hill. Your blankets are covered in bogu and mint. The protea stand in yellow and white. And the water in the stream chuckles, sings songs as it hobbles along over little stones. I've come to wrench you away, away from the man-made monster who lives in the dark, who dissects your body bit by bit, who likens your soul to that of Satan and declares himself the ultimate God. I've come to soothe your heavy heart. I offer my bosom to your weary soul. I will cover your face with the palms of my hands. Run my lips over the lines in your neck. Feast my eyes on the beauty of you, and I will sing for you. For I have come to bring you peace. I've come to take you home where the ancient mountains shout your name. I have made your bed at the foot of the hill. Your blankets are covered in bogu and mint. The protea stand in yellow and white. I've come to take you home where I will sing for you. For you have brought me peace. For you have brought us peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diana. It actually brought me close to tears. Thank you very much for that. And I think as society we stand at the cusp of the turn of the century's tide to really reflect on the journey that we've traveled. And I think that it is at moments such as these when we have people like yourself to make us go back into the inner resources of our own selves and begin to reflect on the journeys that we have undertaken as a people and the subjectivities that our ancestors were subjected to. Thank you very much for that, Diana. Let's give a round of hands, please. Now, please allow me to welcome on stage Ntebaleng Morake. Ntebaleng she's a young woman, activist, political scientist, and public policy analyst. She was involved or still involved in many activist work. At UCT, she was part and parcel of what we've now come to call as the Fallist movement. You would recall in 2015 when a young man stood and threw human excrement at the statue of Cecil John Rhodes. That process, that moment, started to galvanize much broader conversations around the decolonization of the cultural landscape. And at UCT, students started to gather, to come together, to reflect on their role as students in shaping the contour lines of power today. And Ntebaleng, Morake, was part and parcel of that powerful process, which shook the world. Started small, but its impact, it impacted across the oceans and began to give birth to other movements in other parts of the world. I would like us to welcome her this morning as she's coming up front to reflect on the following topic: the role of young women during the Fallist movement and students' politics at universities. This is what she will be reflecting on this morning. And I want us to note the questions, because after all the speakers have spoken, so we'll then take questions, will go, and people then can ask questions and make comments, and then we'll have a discussion there. So could we please welcome Ntebaleng to the stage, please? Thank you very much.
Start reflecting, I think it's important to note and to contextualize the framework of the political economy of South Africa and how that manifested itself within the Fallist space. And I want to do this maybe through reflecting on maybe two stories of women in my life who have shaped, I suppose, my interaction with the world. The first woman is a woman who stayed in the same informal settlement as me back in the 90s in Tembisa. The informal settlement was called Vrouedag, and it's really interesting how this person, whom I've known for years, but I actually never knew her name. So Vrouedag is an informal settlement, and it, like many other informal settlements across the country, there was always fires happening around it. So this woman was somehow the first person to see when a fire happened, and she would run around the settlement saying, "Washum kuku, washum kuku." And so this is a thing that happened frequently until her name was replaced to being Washum kuku. So that systematic erasure of poverty, of blackness, that replaced her name and replaced it to Washum kuku, which is the social conditions of her life. And I think that's problematic. And the second one is someone that we all know, Winnie, and I think I'm interested in her and positioning her within the Fallist space because black women pay for speaking. There's always a price for speaking. And I think everything I'm going to reflect on, the Fallist space was obviously a part and parcel of a broader society, and it's always interesting to question that. How do we begin to, have a decolonized movement in a very colonized society? Because all those notions of sexism, of patriarchy, of racism, of exclusion, of homophobia, they happen outside, but they also manifest themselves within the intersectional Fallist space too. And so South Africa, and to quote Bell Hooks, as a white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal country, means that when we interact in those spaces of organizing, of political mobilization, of decolonization, I suppose, we carry all those things into the space also. So the Fees Must Fall movement, the Rhodes Must Fall movement were all termed to be intersectional, right? We said that the movement will be intersectional or it will be bullshit. And we said that the movement, the Fallist movement, exists because of these three pillars, which is Black consciousness, Black radical feminism, and Pan-Africanism. But however, you see that in as much as Black women had a voice in the space, but the voice often came from having close proximity to men, right? So I can only speak on something depending on how close I am to the men that ultimately led the movement. And that's problematic, right? Because it often means that women that have to position themselves to be likable by men in the movement in order for them to speak, right? And that's problematic. And I think that is a reflection of what happens in society. That you need to position yourself to be likable. If I am the loud, angry feminist that calls out everything, because men were ultimately in charge of that space, you're not going to get a seat at the table. And often we see that, and I think that's my other critique of the movement, that often we spoke about, the idea of Black liberation, the idea of decolonization and all these things, but it will often appear that men in the space were actually interested in those ideas for themselves, So really sometimes it appeared like there wasn't a real interest in changing society. It was an interest in changing society just so they can be at the seat on the table and not really for the ultimate broader goal of the society. And that's really problematic. And we see that in different other parts of society. We see that in politics, we see that in political parties, we see that in NGOs, we see that in corporate, in different movements where Black women will put their bodies on the line. Black women will put everything on the line, but then they're used as stepping stones for men to enhance themselves ultimately. But I think the Fallist space was also really important in the sense that it did shape a bigger conversation around decoloniality, around moving away from this idea of thinking that you can transform a colonial society. So it really did do that. And also, part of the things that also happened around questioning, patriarchy in the movement, around questioning homophobia in the movement, around questioning, how the fact that, this is, just an example, in terms of that positioning yourself to be likable. There were often two observations that I've made, particularly with being a woman in the space, that you would either position yourself as one of the boys, so you'd be there, on the ground, talking like the man. In that way, it's like, she's one of us, Or you'd also position yourself as respectable, that idea of respectability politics, you have your headscarf, and then in that way you think that because you are positioning yourself in that way, then men will give you the platform. And I think that was a problematic thing, now that I reflect on it, that we actually should have fought harder, because in as much as we're talking in that university space around the fact that Black students need to assimilate to the systematic and cultural space in the university, we were also assimilating to the patriarchal norms of the movement, and that's problematic. And part of other things that the movement also questioned was the idea of intersectionality. I think sometimes, and I think this is something globally that a lot of people get wrong, where they think that intersectionality is just adding. When you're making a stew and you're like carrots, potato, tomato, you're just putting it. You're like, oh, look at this intersectional movement. Black women represented, queer people represented, disabled people represented, trans people represented, and we think that's intersectionality. It's not. We can all be here coming from very different walks of life, coming from very different lived experiences. But if there's still one dominant voice in the space, it's not an intersectional movement. So when you look at the pictures, you're like, oh my gosh, look at this beautiful, beautiful movement. But ultimately, it reflects, the lie we were sold back in 1994 around the idea of a rainbow nation without having to fix the systematic issues. Because we're all here, right? The black women are there, the queer people are there, the trans people are there, the disabled people are there, everyone is there, but at the end of the day, who gets to speak and who gets to be the carrier of the movement? And I think that's something that we constantly have to think about in just our different interactions, that what does it mean for me to exist in that thing, does my voice matter? Is my voice important in the space? If so, who am I speaking on behalf of? Who am I representing? And all those things. And so the idea of intersectionality was really, really important in a sense that there were various interventions where black women walked out of the space because they felt that the space was violent and that the space wasn't representing what it promised to represent. But also where other movements started growing from the Fallist movement. And I think it's also problematic that we speak of them as the other. The same way that in South Africa, we're like, oh, race first, let's focus on the conversation on race. But the reality is, I don't come here as just a woman. I don't come here as just a black person. I come here as both those things, right? And many other identities that I occupy. So when my lived experiences and my interaction with the world is not one that is shaped by just me being black, right? It's shaped by me being black and me being a black woman at the same time, and many other identities that I occupy. So it ended up to a space where black women left the space as a means of trying to decolonize the movement that was already trying to decolonize itself, right? So the process of decolonialism is also important because sometimes I was making an example with the idea of gender and sexuality used as the other, So people will say that let's focus on the core issue. The core issue is fees, right? But the core issue is fees, but also what does it mean when I'm being raped in the space where I'm supposed to be fighting for free education? What does it mean to be killed in a space where I'm supposed to be fighting for free education? What does it mean to be silenced or to be told that I can't speak in a space where I'm supposed to be fighting for free education? And so movements like Patriarchy Must Fall that really questioned the patriarchy that existed in the movement, right? And patriarchy is very clever, I think patriarchs have gotten very clever with how they do things, the same way that racists have, really. It's unless you're Kenny Sparrow, then lol. But it's people are very subtle about their oppression, right? So no one is going to tell you that, hey, you shut up, you can't talk. But they find other ways of saying that, but comrade, that's not the issue now, The issue, we'll deal with that later. The first thing we must do is that we must get the fees to fall. And you're like, but I'm dying. I'm not going to get this free education if you kill me first. I'm not going to experience the freedom of having the land, the freedom of being free if you're going to kill me before I get there. So patriarchy really in the movement was very, very progressive, and I think for me, the dangerous patriarch is the progressive one, because you don't see it coming, You're like, how did we get here, Because they don't tell you that you must go wash the dishes during the meeting. You sit in the meeting, you do all these things. They don't tell you that you must be cleaning after them. They don't tell you all those things. But those very subliminal meanings, right? Those conversations that seek to tell you that your experience is one that comes as an afterthought. And even with the issue of sexuality within the movement, where it's like, that there are queer people in the space, but men would also somehow still try their luck, They're like, oh no, but are you sure? What do you mean, I'm sure? But I think at the end of it, having movements that questioned the movement also were very, very important in strengthening the movement and also keeping the movement to check itself and to constantly interrogate itself. I think if you are in a movement where there isn't any form of checking in with yourself, where you're like, this is what we promised, are we really doing this, then it means that movement really doesn't exist because it ultimately exists to serve a few people. And so those experiences of being gendered, of being classed in the space, I think class was also an issue, and I think this is also it's at a national level where I think that we haven't actually learned how to have a conversation on class and patriarchy at the same time. So if I come and I say, Comrade A, you're problematic because you are violent and you are, silencing women in the space, instead of us engaging with that, which is very important, then that gets silenced by saying, oh, you come here with your petty middle-class bourgeoisie struggles, right? Which is also really important, right? The fact that class in the space was also a thing, class was very important. The fact that even what we came to know as far as the Moas fees must fall started in these previously white-only institutions say something about class, right? Where else the same kind of movement and organizing have been happening in previously black institutions for years, right? It says something about class. But we don't know how to hold spaces about those two things where we can have an honest discussion about class and around how class was used also as a means of making certain people have space and voice in the same space because they could hong, but also like that patriarchy at the same time is suffocating and patriarchy kills, I think I will end at there. Yeah.
That's really beautiful. And it just took me back to those were very tough. Those were very tough, long plenary meetings. There was a meeting that took about 6 hours. Plenary meeting, at Bremna, which was then later called Azania. It was one of the most difficult spaces to be in. Young black people or black students gathered in one space for the first time. Bremna building was occupied on the 20th of March 2015, the very first occupation of Bremna. And students from different experiences, different backgrounds gather there for the first time at university. And it was really tough. Things started to come out of the closet. And thank you, Ntebaleng, for really taking us back to those very, very difficult moments, I must say. And I so wish that someday that there will be somebody who's brave enough to write a book that comes, maybe Ntebaleng, you should.
Yes, please.
Maybe you should actually start penning down, because what you've just said here, it summarizes, I think, the heartbeat of the movement in really, within a very, very short space of time. Somebody ready to write something. It does not have to be a thick book, because I still believe that it was such an important moment that I think for people who work in academia or activists, it provided what I've come to term as the foliological paradigm. It says you are hearing it for the first time, right? So you must reference me when you write about this. The foliological paradigm, or the lens to which I think the Fallist movement was able to provide us with, to look at things differently. to question the colonial ecosystem, where one thing, feeds to the other. But at the bottom of it all, you have, the black oppressed. And I think that even within the movement itself, and thank you Ntebaleng for this. I mean, the question of, there were questions of, decolonization, because there were even deeper questions within the decolonial moment in itself, that it raised other problems. The concept itself, that the terminology that we used, articulating our own experiences in English, also raised a lot of questions, because we're black African, and then we express ourselves in the language that is not our own. Then people started to question, even the process of decoloniality in itself. That people were saying, perhaps maybe we need to decolonize decolonization. So very exciting times, and thank you very much for that, Ntebaleng. I would like now to welcome Bernedette Muthien. Bernedette is a scholar. She's a poet and a facilitator. She has served on numerous boards, and she has participated in a number of programs and activities, whose really aim has been to add value to society. And one of the boards that she's serving on at the moment, she's the chair of the Robben Island Museum Council Board. And she was a member of Iziko Museums of South Africa Council. She was one of the council members. And we have worked with Bernedette. I think she has spoken here or participated in a number of public discussions, and that includes the discussion that we had, I think, about a few years back on International Mother Tongue Day. We celebrate that day almost every year on the 21st of February. And I think that, her work, especially serving on the commission that's meant to protect, I think, the right of, cultural, I think it's a long, and, yes. So her work there is quite important in that, it allowed us as a museum to also tap into her expertise in how we deal with the question of languages, linguistic, and cultural freedoms for people in this country. And I'm very excited that she, accepted our invitation to come and share experiences with us here today. And what she will be speaking on, she's not bound by the topic, but she will reflect on the role and challenges that women face in society today. It's a very broad topic. And I said to speakers, they're free to venture into their topics from their different angles. And I think that we are very honored again to have Bernedette this morning. And I think that it's an honor for me whenever we have these big discussions, for me to be able to tap into her expertise and ask her to come and share her experiences with us. I would like us to please join our hands and welcome Bernedette. Thank you very much.
It's such a pleasure to work with Bernedette from Ghani. He's still there. There she is. Such a pleasure to work with them all these many years and to see old friends and to be here with all of you. Somebody's bookmark. What is this? Finders, keepers, losers, sweepers. So to start with, I'm an activist. Let's find it as a semester. When we don't steal pens, we steal bookmarks. So are we decolonizing? So I started my life as a child activist, including a spell in prison, a long epic spell in prison as a high school student. And writing poetry all the while like the Anna. So we've come through decades together doing poetry. feminism, friendship, crying and laughing together. But let me start by asking hard questions. Or maybe they're soft, or maybe they're not hard, not soft, maybe I don't know what they are. But let me start by asking questions. I want to know what is time, and let's stay with it for a second and just try to imagine what is time. Ask some more. Can we measure time? And how long is a piece of string? Then let's look at the egg that many of us have for breakfast, except if we're vegan. Where does the egg begin? Where does the egg end? And it has nothing to do which came first, the chicken or the egg. That egg, where does it begin? What is the top? What is the bottom of that egg? So as we try to grapple very deeply with these essential issues, we can't forget the complexity and the long, long, long histories of everything, including Robben Island, where ironically the colonial archives are the only surviving records of Robben Island history. Isn't that ironic? So under 50 years of apartheid, it obviously served, as we all know, as a prison for black men, meaning brown men, because we're all shades of brown, isn't it? Meaning also not pink men, or also known as not white men, with the attendant white men guards, a haven of patriarchal, racist, colonial depravity, because it was depraved. Men-on-men violence, the way some colonial narratives refer to black-on-black violence. Oh, there's girl-on-girl mud wrestling for like strange fantasies. But if you look at the island's history in terms of patriarchal depravity, male-on-male violence, and its collateral damage on the rest of us, non-males. If we then look at the histories, and its plural histories of colonialism, which is much longer than the 50 years of apartheid, which is stretching now into centuries, over 300 years of colonial history. Some might stretch it further to 500 years and so on, depending on who's asking, who's looking. Then the island, Robben Island, as we call it, the island, can be seen as a colony for people who have leprosy. It served as a prison, as Diana and others have written and said many, many decades long and centuries long, as a prison for Southeast Asian aristocrats, especially male aristocrats, from Dutch colonies of the time. A place of exile for so-called insane people, alcoholics, general misfits like I used to be when I was much younger, and some of my friends still are, and other socially undesirables. A colonial prison for women like Sila van Kaap. We forget that it was a colonial prison where the enslaved people, including enslaved women and children, either with the women or children born on the island, some born from rape, some born from love, populated the island over all its centuries of colonial history. And Sila van Kaap is particularly interesting. A friend of mine who teaches in the US, South African women, brown women, she wrote a book called The Unconfessed. Her name is Yvette Christianse. And it echoes the book by Toni Morrison, who just passed this week, who wrote this incredible book called Beloved, about an enslaved woman who kills her child, and they ask us to think and imagine that I love you so much that I will kill you to free you from slavery. Let's pause about that, because this is the realities of our times, both our colonial history and our current apartheid history. When we're reading in the newspapers of babies being abandoned by girls and women, when we're reading in history of mothers killing their own children, I love you so much that I will kill you to free you from this horror of oppression. where we come from, where we are, and hopefully not where we're going. So the island, Robben Island, has a very long and complex history of many gendered peoples of all ages, from all backgrounds, indeed from all continents. So now let's go back to that egg and that string. And how long is time? What is a day? What's a century? Or millions of years? And then I want to know, where are my eyes? Do I have 2 or do I have 4 eyes? How do I see? And now the Fallists are challenging me and exciting me and going to inspire me to write more poems then. So where are my eyes, I ask, and how do I see? And what indeed do I see, like the banner here, see? And do I want to own this piece of land on which I stand, this plot of soil? Do I want to be like Elon Musk with his colonial lens talking about colonizing Mars? Not exploring, visiting, and I'm excited about that. No, let's go colonize Mars. What are we thinking? What do we do with artificial intelligence, the 4th Industrial Revolution? Cows, plantings, working the earth is hard work. It's not for the faint-hearted. Even if you're using machinery and technology, it's hard and brutal work. Does current Speaker of Parliament, a veteran of struggle, a courageous woman, is perpetually being legally in other ways harassed because for challenging reasons she couldn't look after her farm, or the people she appointed to look after her farm didn't look after it properly, the animals and died and the farm went into a state of disrepair. So owning land is a complex business. It's not give me a piece of land and I'll be like happy. All my troubles will go away. There will be the end of oppression and inequality. No matter whether it's District 6 or any other clod of soil. Contrast that with this clod of soil, this materiality, and think of space which in its essence is infinite. It's the next frontier of power, prosperity, and hopefully if the Fallists, my feminist Fallists have their way, it's potentially a space for patriarchal transformation. Then let's look at indigenous practices the world over, where we know this body, this corpse that I inhabit, it's finite, it's limited. It has organs, it has limbs and whatnot, cells. And then this corpse, this body, exists in an infinite space, where stretching infinitely are 2 threads of matrilineal, female ancestors, and patrilineal, male ancestors. This is what makes up this body. And in going forward, the lives of an infinite progeny. There sits my niece next to Bongani, my elder sister's daughter. Our youth, you, the Fallists, carrying on like space into infinity. Are you still with me? Yes. So which brings me back to my eyes and my gaze. So critically informed, my consciousness or mindsets, what is in my round head. It reminds me of the 1970s when I was very small. And Steve Biko, my big sister, much older than me, was going on, Steve Biko, 1976, so I was barely a child. The most powerful weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed, or the minds, if we want to pluralize it, the minds of the oppressed. So who controls the mindset or the consciousness, controls the discourse, controls literally everything. And then in the 1980s, a full decade later, when I was a little bit bigger, I heard Bob Marley singing, "None but ourselves can free our minds." And in that sense, we are claiming our agency and our critical role, like the young people today, so exciting at universities and elsewhere, claiming the centrality of their existence in the struggles for liberation of all of us. So as we struggle with the structures of oppression, none that are more persistent, these structures of oppression, for me, none is more persistent than patriarchy, which variously is over 5,000 or more years older, depending on which point of the planet you're sticking your gaze is from. And we must critically decolonize and free our consciousness. It is our consciousness, for me, which is the challenge. Many years ago, decades ago, when Diana and I were carousing all the poetry circuits and having a lot of laughter and some pain, I was struck by the post-apartheid government donating or investing millions, literally millions of rands in domestic violence shelters. At the time, around 2001, the first Tutuzela Red Care Center was built in what was known as Gia Just Hospital on the Cape Flats, the Hedefeld side. It was an exciting time to be a young feminist, 2001, in the post-apartheid South Africa, healing from rape and other brutalities that we suffered as little girls and young women at the time. So here, all these millions are being pumped into shelters for women, survivors of various forms of patriarchal violence. And then I ask, but why are the shelters so full? The managers of the shelters say, we can't cope, we have to turn women away, they're stressed, underpaid, overworked shelter managers and shelter workers. They can't cope, they're turning women away. It horrified me. How can you turn a suffering woman away? A battered woman, a raped, an abused woman, and her hordes of children. How could you morally and ethically turn them away? We can't feed them, we don't have enough money. Yet the state was giving millions and millions and millions of rands. The donors were giving millions and millions of dollars and euros into these shelters, some more beautiful than others. Every little township community, including the hovel I came from, Cravenby, where we grew up very poor, they even had a domestic violence shelter. Some sweet women got together and created a shelter for battered women. But why then does battery, does the beating of women, does the violence in the families, in the streets, does rape persist? Why do women remain in the relationships of battery, of victimhood, of violence? And what's the difference between women who stay or get killed? Because a woman is murdered between 4 and 8 hours, depending on which statistic you're using. Every day, every couple of hours, South African couple of hours, a woman is murdered by her male partner in this country. So, given all of that, what's the difference between those women and the ones who exit abusive relationships? It's the mindset, it's the consciousness, it's the agency. Two women, similar conditions. The one that exits is the mindset. So if we work with the mindsets, even if the material conditions remain the same, there's a greater degree of agency, a greater degree of comparative freedom from oppression. Do you know what I mean? So it's only, for me, the work, the deepest work, as we work on the material conditions and the structures of our society, it's the complex work and hard work around consciousness and mindsets that will truly free us. So as we're going about looking at and thinking of ourselves and others, and no pun intended on the others, do we see what? Do we see a flag of rainbow? Or do we see a stepladder of hierarchy? How much do we see inside of ourselves? Do we see the reflection of our infinite beauty? Or do we only see what is projected by a violent and brutal society? Horror, ugly. I have a gap tooth, said a beautiful young singer at the Baxter on Wednesday night. I'm too fat, she said, like I do half the time. I'm too fat, I say when I look at them. Oh my God, I can't cope with the aging. Look at all these wrinkles. So, what is it that we see when we look in the mirror? Do we know of indigenous societies on all the continents? All the continents, literally, and I have a plethora of societies, and I've written much, and you can Google it too. All the continents exist to this day, despite 5,000 years of patriarchy and male domination. There exist what is called matricentric societies. These are egalitarian, or not hierarchical, but egalitarian societies. They are not violent, or they're less violent. These are the Khoisan of Southern Africa. Our people who live all across the Southern Africa, including in Malawi. They are in Indonesia, India, China, North America. They're in Seychelles, Malawi, and Zambia. In fact, the majority of people are matrilineal, tracing their roots to their motherline in Malawi and Zambia. Right here, our neighbors, as they are our people, the Khoisan in Southern Africa. So in viewing, in thinking, in practicing, We must know the wombs from which we are all inevitably birthed. These wombs from which we all birthed, it stretches into infinity. Think about it. Where do you come from? A test tube? A supermarket shelf? Or are you birthed from a womb? Are you? Thank you. I'm wondering about you. While I'm talking about wombs stretching on infinity, are you snoozing or not? And it's the songs of Diana and others, the songs of womb-centered strength, power, pain and pleasure that echo for me through millions of years of human and women existence. It's women who harbor, who create, who birth, who nourish humanity. Without women, none of us really would be here. So like the earth, the planets, the cosmos, all are ovoid or egg-shaped. It's like the womb too is the very same shape. The source of all life. Don't forget. It's this very womb, this virtual egg or ovum that we must reclaim, empower, celebrate, and recenter, bring back to center, to balance our societies, to eliminate inequality, to eliminate violence, to eliminate exploitation and oppression. Ntebaleng so beautifully spoke. God, I thought now I can finally retire, you know, between you and my niece and the other young people. You speak with such beauty. And you speak with power around the idea of decolonizing. It's like outside the museum, my niece, very sweet, she says, why in front of a slave lodge is a statue of Smuts? I know Wandile has been a quaint clipper for many years. I have been witness to his clipper about the statues and the transformation thereof. And why do we still call it a slave lodge when it should be a space where people were enslaved? So this decolonizing of decolonizing is an infinite struggle, a wrestle both within and without. It relates to Wandile's phonological paradigm, the lenses. I love the way he spoke of a colonial ecosystem, because it is that. Patriarchy too, as Ntebaleng said, is a very powerful and transmogrifying. It continuously evolves and adapts to enslave us better, not just in shackles, but our mindsets, which are far more powerful. If women and other oppressed people remain enslaved in the mind, then slavery has won. So let's dream, comrades, colleagues and friends. Let's bring home this vision of ancient societies that still existed this very day. Let's go back and find them if we've forgotten them, if we don't know about them. Let's go and reclaim them. Let's find our societies, these women-centered societies. Let's celebrate the diversity, the rainbow. Let's reclaim egalitarianism. Let's reclaim non-violence. And let's together be free.